Greetings and God's blessings from Park Rapids, Minnesota. I want to thank you again for joining me as I open up God's Word and share a message from the heart of God, because that's what the Word of God does. It shares God's heart with us. And so we are especially seeing that as we go through an examination, a look, a study of the autopsy of the life of Christ, because Dr. Luke is in essence giving that to us. And so as we read through the Gospel of Luke, we see Jesus, and as a result, we see God in the heart of God. In our last week's lesson, we saw a man with great faith. And so I want to ask you, how great is your faith? How much do you trust Jesus? How much do you trust God? Because the Bible makes it clear, without faith, without that kind of deep trust in God, we can't please Him. And so today we're continuing on in the Gospel of Luke, in Luke chapter 7. And we're going to begin, with the title. The title of the lesson is God Has Come to Help Us. Do you believe that? Do you trust that? That's kind of where we're going with this. God has come to help us. And so the question I want to begin with is, does Jesus care when we're hurting? Does He care about what you're going through? Does He know what you're going through? And I believe He does. I believe Jesus knows what you and I are going through. And one of the main reasons is because He experienced life on earth, just like you and I. He has gone through the experiences of loss. He said goodbye to those that He loved. His stepfather, Joseph, had died before we see Jesus enter His ministry. So sometime between the age of 12 and the age of 30, Jesus' father had passed away. And he knew what grief was. Jesus knew what it was to feel loss, to feel betrayal, to experience the hurt, the same kind of hurt that we do. And He felt that hurt as He interacted with other people and he had sympathy as well as empathy. The difference being, sympathy is, I feel for you even though I may not have experienced it. I don't know what you're going through. Empathy, on the other hand, is the idea that I have gone through what you're going through. And so in that case, for the most part, that's what Jesus has for us, is empathy, because He lived on this earth, and He experienced humanity and the hurt and the losses. So does Jesus care when we're hurting? Let's look at a story and see a demonstration of this. Our story's in Luke chapter 7, verses 11 through 17. Luke chapter 7, verses 11 through 17. It says, soon afterward, this would have been soon after He had healed the centurion's servant. It says, soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and His disciples and a large crowd went along with Him. So we've got Jesus, His disciples, and a crowd traveling into Nain. Meanwhile, as He approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother. And she was a widow. And a large crowd from the town was with her. So then, on the other hand, so we've got Jesus, His disciples, and a large crowd coming into Nain. At the same time, we have a woman, and she's a widow, and her dead son, and a large crowd from the community coming out of the gates. And so there's this mingling, there's this meeting that takes place at the gates of Nain. Okay, let's continue on. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." Then he went up, touched the coffin, and those carrying it stood still. He said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. They were all filled with awe and praised God. "A great prophet has appeared among us," they said. God has come to help his people. This news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country. So we've seen Jesus do some amazing things. We've seen Jesus at this point heal sick people, heal lame people. He has cast out demons. And now in this instance, we have this collision of these two groups of people meeting at the gates of Nain. And one is Jesus and his followers, and the other is a widow and her dead son being carried out to be buried, and the funeral crowd. And I want you to notice here, because we're told a widow's son had died, and that's a significant statement. First of all, it tells us a mother has lost her son. And I can't express empathy. I can sympathize, but I haven't lost a child. But someone who has lost a child, the pain, the loss, the natural order of things is we expect our children to bury us, to say goodbye to us, not the other way around. And here we have this woman who is saying goodbye to her only son, her only child. And then we're also given another glimpse into the situation because we're told she's a widow. What does that mean? Well, Captain Obvious here. It means that not only has she lost her son, but she has lost her husband at some point. Doesn't tell us how recently, but now she has no one. In that society, whether we agree with it or not, or whether we want we condemn it or not, women were looked at as second-rate citizens, and the men were the providers. The men took care. And so this woman had a husband that took care of her, and he's gone. And then she had a son that would take care of her, would have the responsibility of taking care of her. And now he's gone. And now she's without anyone. Her family is gone. And so she's alone, and she's grieving, and she's hurting. And I can't imagine the pain she's experiencing as this funeral procession to bury her son. And so we've got this dynamic going on that here we have one of the least of these, a widow, who has lost her only child. And she's hurting, but notice the language that Luke uses. Again, he's writing to not the Jewish thought process, but to the Gentile thought process, to the world, to the Greeks, and the importance of equality and things like that. And so notice the focus here. It talks about a dead body, a dead person. But everything is in relation to this woman. It says he's the only son of his mother. So it addresses her. She was a widow. It goes on and says a large crowd was with her. The Lord saw her. His heart went out to her. He said to her. And so all of this in this story is focused on this woman, this hurting, this grieving woman. And let's see, what does Jesus do? So we're going to look at two statements, two things that Jesus says. The first one, when Jesus says, don't cry. It's found in verse 13. When Jesus says, don't cry. Look at Luke 7 and verse 13. When the Lord saw her, his heart overflowed with compassion. Don't cry, he said. Now, I don't know. You've probably been hurting. Maybe it's at a very similar setting to this at a funeral, and someone tells you, oh, don't cry. It's going to be all right. You know, you've heard those placating statements, those statements that are just, oh, it's going to be okay. Don't cry. That's not what Jesus is doing here. You and I do that. In fact, I have to be careful of that. As a minister and doing funerals, that's not something I have to bite my tongue. It's not something I can say, oh, don't cry. In fact, often I say, it's good to cry. We need to cry. But Jesus says, don't cry. And he says this out of a heart overflowing with compassion. He cares. He cares for this woman. And so this isn't just some platitude he's offering. Oh, don't cry. There's something behind this. We're going to look at a story in a couple of weeks in the future here in Luke. In Luke chapter 8, verses 52 and 53, we have the story of a young girl that has died. Another situation where a parent is grieving the loss of a child. And so in this instance, Jesus, the man has come to Jesus, the father, to beg him to come and heal his daughter. But before Jesus gets there, the news comes, the girl has died. So Jesus, they tell him, oh, you don't need to come. She's died. But Jesus goes and he gets there and there's a lot of people crying. Remember, this girl has just died. Just in the process of Jesus traveling there, just a short distance. So Luke chapter 8, 52 and 53 says, everyone was crying. This is the funeral. And showing how sad they were. Jesus said, don't cry. She's not dead. She's just sleeping. They laughed at him because they knew she was dead. Two different worldviews here. Two different realities. They know this girl has just died. They know that they've lost someone they love. They know that these parents are hurting because their child is no longer alive. And yet Jesus comes and says, don't cry. Don't cry. Because the girl's not dead. She's just sleeping. And to them, this is a joke. And they laugh at him. But you see, the reality was, Jesus knew the true reality. Jesus knew what he was going to do. Jesus knew that death isn't final, that death isn't the end of the story, that we were created to live eternally. And so in 1 Thessalonians 4 and 13, the Apostle Paul tells Christians like you and I that are dealing with the subject of losing loved ones, of death, of people we care about. In 1 Thessalonians 4:13, Paul writes, and now, dear brothers and sisters, we want you to know what will happen to the believers who have died. So you will not grieve like people who have no hope. It doesn't say that you will not grieve. He says you'll not grieve like people who have no hope. That you won't be so sorrowful and broken because you think this is the end of the story. That death is final, that there is no hope. Jesus, because of his power, because of his death, burial, and resurrection, which is yet to happen in the events of our story today in Nain, yet Jesus knew what he was going to do for this widow and her son. And so Jesus was saying, don't cry, because death is not final. Death is not final. It's not the end of our story when we're in Jesus, when we're believers. So that's the first thing that Jesus says. When Jesus says, don't cry. The second thing Jesus says is when Jesus says, arise, arise. So that's found in verse 14, Luke 7 and verse 14. And this time he speaks not to the grieving mother. This is the only time he focuses on the son. And remember, the son is dead. He doesn't pray to God in heaven. He speaks to this dead son. It says in Luke 7 and verse 14, and he came and he touched the bier. Just to pause there. I am 61 years old, and I have always read that word, B-I-E-R, as bier, a funeral bier. You learn something every day. And this week I learned the proper pronunciation is bier. And he came and he touched the bier. The New International Version says the coffin. A bier would have been basically a stretcher that they still use in Middle Eastern countries. If you've seen in the news, when someone is dying there, they carry the body on this stretcher type thing and a crowd gathers around them. And so this is the case. And he came and he touched the bier. And the bearer stood still and he said, young man, I say to you, arise, arise. And so what happens? The most amazing thing. The dead son sits up. And not just sits up, he began speaking. And then Jesus does the most amazing thing. Again, the focus is on the mother. And it says, and he presents him and he gives him back to his mother. Does Jesus care when we're hurting? I don't know how you can read this story and not understand and believe how much Jesus cares for us, especially when we're hurting. In John 11, verses 25 and 26, we're at another funeral, a different funeral. This is a funeral of Lazarus. And Jesus has arrived, not early enough. He didn't leave early enough. He didn't come to heal Lazarus. Lazarus has died, and he's been dead for 3 days. He's been dead and buried. And he's come, and the people are grieving. His sister, Martha, comes out to Jesus. And in Luke chapter 11, verses 25 and 26, Jesus says this to Martha. He says, Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Now, he says almost contradictory. He says, if you believe in him, you'll never die. And even though he dies, he's going to live forever. So what it's talking about is we may die physically, but spiritually, but that soul is eternal and it is going to live forever. And that there is going to be a resurrection. What's a resurrection? Arise, coming back to life again. And so Jesus makes this statement, or Jesus says, I am the resurrection. So here's the point. Here's what I need to know and believe. Jesus is the resurrection. In fact, that's what he concludes with in this statement. He says, do you believe this? Jesus is the resurrection. Do you believe this? Do you believe that Jesus is the resurrection? That's why he could say to this dead young man, the son, the only son of this widow from Nain, arise. And this man hears that call and he comes back to life. In John chapter 5 and verse 25, Jesus says, I tell you the truth, a time is coming and has now come when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. Time's coming. It's already was there. We see example right here with this young man on the outskirts of Nain at the city gates. who hears the voice of Jesus is raised. But I believe that same thing is going to happen when Jesus comes again. And we're going to hear the voice of the Lord. And those that are dead are going to arise when Jesus says, arise. When he calls them by name and says, arise. So, when Jesus says arise, what do we need to do? We need to hear Jesus' command and live forever. Hear Jesus' command and live forever. Do you want to live forever? I do, if it's with a Lord and a Savior who loves me and cares for me like this. In Luke 7 and verse 16, what's the result? The people say this and they say something amazing has happened. Luke 7 and verse 16. All the people were amazed and began praising God, saying, a great prophet has come to us. What does that mean? God has come to help his people. God has come to help his people. Here's the thing though, that phrase, God has come to help his people, the literal translation from the Greek that's used here in Luke chapter 6 it says, God has visited his people. God has visited his people. That's what it means. God has visited his people. And so the idea of visiting, that's why some translation says come to help, because that's what the idea of the visitation is. That's why God has come. Not just to visit, to be a tourist. God has come to help his people. Why? Because he cares. He cares for us. And then here's the great news. That's good news. God has come to help his people. God visited us. But Revelation 21 verses 3 and 4, the Apostle John shares this. Revelation 21, verses 3 and 4. I heard a loud voice shout from the throne. This is as he's witnessing the new Jerusalem, like a bride coming out of heaven in this eternal city of God. It says, I heard the loud voice saying from the throne, God's home is now with his people. He will live with them, and they will be his own. Yes, God will make his home among his people. He will wipe all tears from their eyes, and there will be no more death, suffering, crying, or pain. These things of the past are gone forever. So at that time, they recognized God had visited. God had visited to help them. But we are promised in Revelation that someday that we are going to live with God. He's going to have his home with us, God's home with us. And what's the result? He says he's going to wipe away all the tears. There is going to be no more death. There's going to be no more suffering, crying, or pain. The very things that God came when he was visiting. And he says, don't cry and arise from the dead. And in the end, he's going to be with us. And there'll be no more tears and no more death. Are you looking forward to that home, God's home with us? I sure am, because God has come to help us. God bless and have a wonderful week.